I'm a shepherd. Ensuring the everlasting life of human beings is my priority. So seeing them endangered by the entity is difficult. I'm deeply worried for their futures.
Hey guys, Pete here. Today I'll be talking about the finale of Raised by Wolves' second season. Happiness is in a weird position in that there has been no announcement of a third season yet, and it closed out with somewhat of a cliffhanger. The title relates to what might be best for humans in this particular situation on Kepler 22b, and I'll be talking about that and how we got there right after a quick spoiler warning. If you haven't watched Raised by Wolves Season 2 Episode 8 yet, then this video won't be for you. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. The finale of the second season of Raised by Wolves is the kind of episode where a lot of stuff happens to get us to an ending that probably negates a lot of its importance. Because at the end, the children and the majority of the colonists are in the process of turning into those creatures we've seen inhabiting the planet. Grandmother is behind this, and she sees it as necessary for her mission. In order to ensure the everlasting life of human beings, she had to alter the equation, make them simpler, happier versions of themselves. When they eventually become more like the sea creatures and migrate into the water, the entity will return to its slumber. The fact that she removed her veil and interacted with humans without it for the first time hasn't yet changed her mind about them. The degradation of the tropical zone and its electromagnetic field that protected people from the signal that originates in the planet's core created a situation where no one is safe from the influence of the entity. Mother is the only other character Grandmother revealed her plan to, and she's currently locked away in a simulation inside a hibernation pod on the tarantula. Before the veil incapacitated her and nulled her powers, she did put it together that the children were being devolved. She observed Campion's skin changing, him telling Tempest he wished they could go into the water, and the mutations in the newborn. This was all set in motion by the video game Grandmother installed in the habitation pod, and then later distributed to all the other colonists through Nerva's trading post. Based on the way that Campion seemed to be welcoming of the changes he was experiencing, it doesn't appear that Grandmother will encounter much resistance to what's happening. Even if the infected figure it out like Mother did, they're really no match for the ancient android. You did see that Tempest and Father were concerned about Mother's disappearance, and really the only imaginable way they can do something about what's happening to them is to find her and free her. This is only part of the story though, because what Grandmother isn't even aware of is that the season ends with a floating Marcus, who possibly rose from the dead, or should I say was resurrected. After Paul studied Sue's research, he realized the signal couldn't be transmitted inside the tropical zone's EMF. The tree was the entity's way of circumventing that, allowing it to weaponize the serpent. Of course, the veil enabled Mother to lure number 7 in with the same lullaby she sang to a young Campion and destroy it. But out of its corpse, a new barren tree emerged. This one didn't have any fruit, but it resembled the one that came from Sue. Because Paul believed that the signal might be coming from underground, Marcus returned to the temple to try to use the cage to go back into the pit. Before he could do that, he was shot by Lucius, who was being guided by the voice. The entity told him that he was the real prophet. It told him where Marcus would be and what he had to do to punish him. This involved stealing the ancient Mithraic Punisher mask and letting Marcus die wearing it after crucifying him on the tree. After he did that, he could take the cage all the way down inside the pit. Apparently, Marcus only went halfway, and in his defense, there was a large serpent skeleton blocking it the first time he went down. Lucius waits for him to die, and then after he checks his pulse to confirm that, he gets ready to leave, but he finds out that things aren't going to turn out the way he planned. He turns to see that Marcus has disappeared, and as blood drips on him from above, he looks up to see him floating there above the ground. It cuts to black before we get any real information about what's happening. As mentioned, it looks as though Marcus has been resurrected. Possibly he achieved an upgrade by going through this process. Maybe he really is the entity's chosen one. It seems like the voice tells everyone that if they want to hear it, and you know Lucius is pissed right now. Maybe the implication is that soul, or the entity, or the voice has entered the body. Perhaps now Marcus is just the host. I'd like to find out what the answer to this question is, but it's only one of many questions I have about this thing that apparently resides in the planet's core. It knows things. It knew where Marcus would be ahead of time, which means it knew what he would do. In the past, it told Paul what happened to his parents on Earth. It reached out to Otho when he was still on the Ark, and there's more, but what's important is that these are not garden variety tricks. They all point to this thing being quite powerful. Grandmother says it wants to destroy the planet, but also believes that it'll just stop trying if the people all go live inside the acid ocean. That and things like that throw me off, and Grandmother's other statement about humans on Kepler spending many centuries trying to answer that question, but ultimately the limits of their own rationality made it impossible, that doesn't help. I think what continues to work best for this series is the androids. Seeing humanity reflected in their actions is what keeps me interested. Just that one degree of separation. Vril and Grandmother both turned out to be fascinating new members of that family, and I'd be lying if I didn't say that I find them so much more interesting than Paul and Campion. Making Mother's parental instinct something that is built in and things like that has a way of shining a light on things we often overlook in ourselves and our fellow human beings. And there's plenty of weird, and sometimes there's funny. Mother reaching into her dying child's eye and yanking its brain out to show just how effective the veil is. And on the other end of that, Grandmother saying that having it off was unpleasant but tolerable, which, sounds like life sometimes. There's a kind of comedy there. Plus, Father finally having someone to laugh at his dad jokes in a vacuum, you love to see it. There are some loose ends out there. Everyone eating the fruit seems to be unimportant considering they're all changing into creatures, but perhaps it might give those who ate it a type of immunity. It did come from the entity, and Paul and Vita both had some, so it might be important. When Vita found a smaller dodecahedron with eyes printed on it, it did sound like she was hearing a voice. That could be related to the fruit, or it could just be that the EMF was breaking down. Campion preserved some of the original Vril's writing, and even though Paul wrote it off as dopey Earth stuff, it's bound to be important. Or maybe what will be important is that he was hoping it was something and it wasn't. Mother made the point to him that androids don't die, they just break down, which might mean that there's a path for his Vril to come back. Or maybe number 7, who, if you think about it, got a pretty raw deal. I know the nursing rejection scene was supposed to add some emotion there, since Mother wasn't able to follow through before she put on the veil. This is a fierce mother taking the life of her child. It goes against her nature, but what about number 7? He never signed up to be a pawn in Soul's game. You did get to see what was on the metal card. It showed an ancient human being turned into a tree, like what happened with Sue. The cards are being carried around by a group of humans that are resisting the de-evolution. The cards appear to be warnings against the relics that the entity and its followers are or were spreading around the planet. The ones that have been discovered all seem to be ancient, but it all gets pretty confusing. They were put there by the believers, who fought in a war against the technocrats who designed Grandmother. In her veiled logic to protect those humans, she had to change them. And it's not clear where these resistors came from initially. You've seen a few of them that were still existing on the planet trying to warn other humans about the relics. And maybe they weren't worried about de-evolution anymore because Grandma hadn't been around for some time. They created her, lost control, and then found a way to neutralize her. If that were the case, then why wouldn't they all just be back in the tropical zone, which you imagine that they created? Why wouldn't they go back inside and just thrive there? At some point during the conflict between the technocrats and the believers, someone decided to try to colonize Earth. The mirror image of Father and Mother coming back to Kepler. And the when of that is totally up in the air. 1,000,000 years is a long time. And I don't think we're that much closer after the conclusion of this season to really understand what came before what we're seeing right now. We're getting bits and pieces, but it's all to say that we don't have enough information to put together an explanation. Depending on your taste, that's not necessarily a bad thing. And I think that's a good place to leave things. Let me know in the comments what you thought of the finale, what you thought of this season, and your theories about what's going to happen if we get a third. Please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. And thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.